But where is he? Remember I asked you on the ranking. I mean, where is that cat ranked right now? With that kind of money, I'll ask Sam this too. Is he a 20? Is he a 25? Or is he sub 20? Because if you're going to say he's sub 20, you better come to the table explaining how you can justify that he's a sub 20.
Welcome to another edition of the SumerSports Show. Lindsay Rhodes with Thomas Dimitrov. Kicking off week 2. We got another series of games coming up this weekend. Can't wait for that. Happy to have you back from your travels now, Thomas, so that we can get through a pretty serious topic today. One that I think that I'm really looking forward to this conversation. I'll get to what that is. But first, welcome back.
I can't wait. This is high stakes football, right? This is what the NFL is now, right? What we're going to be talking about today. Every time you turn the corner here, this isn't just about a few $100,000 here, right? This is about organizational decisions that are blockbuster decisions. We're going to get to that, I know, in a minute. I was down in Miami, got a chance to visit with a couple of the teams that are in the Thursday night game today. So that was good for me. That's going to be a regular occurrence. Hopefully, as the season moves on, that I will be traveling around those Thursday games. Without getting into detail about that, it's amazing when you're around the teams and you see what they're going through to get everything ready. I happen to be near the team hotel. They're dealing with something completely different than the Browns are, right? Whether it's the Bills or whether it's the Dolphins. And it just continues to remind me, and for everyone out there, like, you become so sort of myopic in your world and everything revolves around you as a general manager, as a head coach, of course, as the team. It's amazing. You're not thinking about the things that are happening around the world as much. It's just a realization of what we're talking about today. They're big time ideas and decisions, and that's where your head is as a team builder in the NFL.
Yeah, I mean, certainly after 1 week of play, it's really early in the season, right? And in most cases, I think, we on the outside are hitting panic buttons right and left about a whole bunch of different things that the teams are probably concerned about it in varying degrees. But I think the conversation that we're going to have today is about, I think, a fairly big story that has legs because it goes back further than just week 1 and what we saw in week 1. And that is the Cleveland Browns quarterback situation. And we all know that this has been in the news since they signed him for a variety of different reasons. He gets the biggest contract ever, all guaranteed. That's never happened before. Obviously had a bunch of off-field issues that kind of made him a polarizing figure, not even kind of, like massively made him a polarizing figure and put what he did with the Browns under a microscope. And then since then has not played particularly well and also has not played consistently. The most that he's played in his first 2 seasons has been 6 games in each of his first 2 seasons there. So now he is healthy for the time being, but did not look good in week 1. And the calls for them to make a change there have already begun nationally in terms of television, talk, radio, all of this kind of stuff. So what we wanted to do on this show here today is say, like, SumerSports is uniquely situated to have a conversation about this that is maybe a little bit smarter than you're going to hear on some of the debate shows, because we have a lot of deep data. We have a lot of deep scouting. And so we're going to take a look at the data. And to help us do that, we're going to bring in Sam Bruckhaus, who is a data scientist for Sumer. He's also the host of Sumer Daily, and I'm very interested to have him contribute to this conversation, having taken a look at a lot of the numbers here with regards to Deshaun Watson. We will check that box. Hi, Sam. Welcome to the show.
Hi. Thank you for having me.
Looking good, man. Looking all spiffy. He's overshadowing us here, Lindsay. I mean, look at him up there.
He's much more Natalie dressed than I am. That's for sure.
I know Thomas loves to dress to the nines. He's a big fan of the full Windsor. So I tried to do my best, bring a little suit and tie today, but we'll see how it goes.
We can't see your knot, though. It's behind your mic. Let me just see that for a second. Okay. All right. I'm going to do a little bit of work with you on that. But the great thing about Sam, as smart as he is, he's so open to taking mentoring in his own way, right? He's a star in the making. We love having him here at Sumer, not only as that by trade a data scientist, but an emerging talent there Lindsay, before you know it, I mean, he's going to be the star of the show. I hate to say that.
Are you threatening me? Like we've done like 3 shows together. Did you just put me on the hot seat?
No.
We're going to talk about Andrew Barry and Lindsay. Like, how did that happen? Anyway, yes. No, fair enough.
No,
fair
I'm
enough.
talking about his own show. I should rephrase that. Of his own show,
host
right?
Of
so it's all great.
5 days a week. Yep. Very, very good. Very good show. Like bite-sized episodes so that you can, get some good content for you and then get back to your day. So we're going to take a look at the data and what it tells us with regard to Deshaun Watson and the Browns. We're also going to take a look at the tape. And Thomas Dimitroff obviously has some experience in scouting. And so he has put his eyes on some of Deshaun Watson's tape, has a lot of access to obviously what scouts have said over the years with regards to his play in the last couple of years there at Sumer. So we will check that box as well. We'll take into consideration for this conversation the finances, because clearly that's a big part of this equation. I mentioned earlier the first fully guaranteed contract in the history of the league. Thomas, a few weeks ago on one of our first shows, we talked about the fact that they had renegotiated his contract, moved some money around. He has a cap hit next year of $72.9 million and a cap hit the year after that of $72.9 million. No matter what you do with him, unless you can somehow get out of the contract, which is a separate conversation that I know people are having right now, that's a hit that you're going to take whether he's playing for you or not. So that is something we have to consider. We're going to take into consideration, but not discuss at length, the off-field stuff, because clearly that is a factor here in terms of how much risk you're willing to metabolize with his play on the field, because there's a PR backlash that comes along with putting him out there anyway. And so that factors into this. We're going to take into consideration what other options are available, because that's always the next question, right? Okay, so we're going to do this. Now what? And if the other options are even better in terms of ability to win and health of the franchise long term. First, though, Thomas, let's start here. If you were the general manager of this team and people in the building came to you and said what has been said on televisions and talk radio shows all week long, which is we should move on, where would you start to have that conversation?
Would you mind? I am totally going to answer that question. I can't wait to dive into it. Can I just set the context here for a minute, only because I think it's necessary, right? You have the Cleveland Browns organization and owners, Jimmy and Dee Haslam, well respected around the league. They put everything they can into that organization. They have an incredibly smart group in Andrew Barry as a GM, Paul DePodesta, who is and Sam knows him, right? He is a whirlwind, unbelievable academic, smart man who did really well in the baseball world, moved over to the football world, provided a lot of information along the way. They are considered one of the smartest organizations, given the fact that Andrew's approach is seriously considering data. So take that all take it all in, keep it in perspective that you're not just talking about a shambles of an organization. People will always argue what they want to argue, right? They're a thoughtful organization with some really good football people. And then the last thing, then however you start leading into Cleveland, right? I was born and raised, I wasn't really raised there, but born in Cleveland. I know that community. They're football passionate, right? At so many levels. They get excited right away and they also get down right away. So there's a lot going on there. This stat just came across, and Sam, you might have seen it. Since 99, they've had 38 quarterbacks roll through the Cleveland Browns. Lindsay, that is a big deal. So I'm painting the positive picture. I'm also painting organizational picture. There's a lot going on there.
Which, by the way, Thomas, is the context under which they made this deal. And everyone in NFL circles knows that. That's why they were desperate enough to make this deal, because they had never hit at quarterback and they were desperate to hit at quarterback. And so if there's a franchise out there that just, it makes sense, barring your feelings about whether they should have done it or not, right? This is clearly the driver, is we are the desperate team because we can't find a quarterback. And if we find a quarterback, then everything changes. And so that's why we're in this situation in the first place. But I think it's really smart to point out the fact that other moves have been made that are very good. They were a competitive team last year, despite all of the issues that they had at quarterback. The defense was one of the best defenses in the NFL. This is not a team that was built poorly, but they have a problem at quarterback. And that's what we're discussing. So let's say, going back to the original question, we're going to you and we're saying, fuck, what do we do?
Right. And so I start thinking about the quarterback situation, and my head does go there if I'm sitting there. Why is this organization struggling? It goes all the way back. I was there way back in the day when we drafted Tim Couch, right? Not to stay there too long. I'm just watching through the years of the draft picks that they have made. Why is that organization seemingly plagued by not pulling in the guy that's going to take them to the promised land? It's a big deal. It goes back to what I've said all along, Lindsay. If you don't make the right choices, not only in drafts, but acquiring and situating your quarterback room, that's how you're being judged. All of a sudden, all of that great stuff that surrounds you as an organization, as team builders, it starts to water down a little bit. You could, if someone comes to me, one of my let's call it the assistant general manager, Lindsay, and says, we need to make a change. That was your lead in on this, right? Eventually getting to your point. I mean, my initial response is going to be, as a general manager, all right. Let's calm down here for a minute. Back the fuck off for a second here. Let's not overreact. And let's take this all in, because I want the people that come to me, no matter where they are on the totem pole within that organization, to suggest a monumental move, like moving on from a quarterback like this, so much around it, so polarizing, but to make that call and that suggestion without thinking about the repercussions, without understanding that the job is not only on the line for the general manager, but the assistant general manager and the entire scouting staff, and quite honestly, the entire organization. This is the kind of blockbuster move that could make or break by bringing someone in, but also by releasing. And the reason I say that is those people that come to me or come to the general manager during that serious situation, they better have all their T's crossed and I's dotted. Because would have very little patience, and I think most GMs would have very little patience for the suggestion if it were to be haphazard, because it's not on them, because they're not necessarily on the hot seat for it. This isn't just the personal side. I'm saying it's a really agitated feeling. I'm putting my head into that, and I'm thinking about it right now. I'd be very agitated. Remember, Andrew Berry is not an agitated soul, man. That guy's a cool cat. Good guy. I'm sure he's not as agitated as I would be over that, or some of the other old school GMs out there. But the reality is, let's play it all out here. Let's work through this. And it is multi-layered before you make that decision.
Yeah. My guess is that your agitation would be lessened by the fact that you would probably have seen this conversation coming to a degree, for the reasons that we'll get into. Let me just ask you, Sam. Let's pretend like you are one of these lieutenants that walked in here, without getting into all of the reasons why. He sets that tone and he says, are you ready to stake your claim to your job on what you're about to tell me and on the argument that we should maybe move on here? How confident are you that your answer to that is yes? Let's continue talking.
Right. I think one of the scouts, when they wrote the article, and we have some great scouting series is up on SumerSports.com, said, in the scouting world, you just write what you see. And when you're taking in all this information, both from scouts and from the field of play and from your analysts who are crunching numbers and running algorithms and things like that, you just want to write what you see and deliver a clear and consistent bottom line to the leader who has to make a decision. And in at this standpoint with Deshaun Watson, the bottom line is pretty clear. This guy has not been performing like a starting quarterback in this league. Now, a myriad of reasons that then me and Thomas and the other analyst and everyone else has to start going through. Why is he not performing like a starting quarterback in this league? Why did he perform like one of the best quarterbacks in the league back then? Can the situation be fixed? Is there an injury risk? Are there other conflicting data points that go against that? But if I'm delivering a bottom line on this, that bottom line is this player is not performing like a top tier quarterback.
Okay, Thomas. So that's the answer. Yes, we're moving forward with this conversation. If you're willing to listen, what information are you looking for next to help you make this decision?
I believe, I'm going to look at the big picture, of course. I will have talked, of course. I'm sure Andrew Berry and head coach and owner have had discussions about this, to your point earlier. I'm going to do my job on the GM side. I'm going to pull back and I'm going to bring the staff together, and I'm going to now take it away. I'm going to put the data aside for a minute, Sam, and I'm going to say, we got it. We're going to come back here and we're going to really take that data and compare to where our subjective analysis may be. But my point would be to bring our staff in, the main key stakeholders in that personnel staff, the ones that I really, really trust. And I trust, you'll trust all of your staff, but there's usually 1, 2, 3, or 4 that you really want to drill down with. You want to literally go in and watch vid after vid, scenario after scenario to see what this situation truly is. And it's not just off the cuff. Of course, this organization knows that. They've been looking at it before he even came to the Browns, from the Texans, right? They've done a ton of work on this guy. But why is he where he is now, and how bad is it? To your point before, Lindsay, is it the blip on the screen or is it legit? I'm sure, Sam, you're going to suggest when we get to data, it's more than just a blip. I mean, when you get a chance to watch this most recent game, man, it's not fair that it's just on him. They don't have 2 of their tackles. Would they have 5 or 6 penalties in the first quarter? There was just so much putting them back in third and long situations, et cetera, et cetera. But you're expecting your quarterback to rise to the occasion. You're expecting your quarterback of that stature, literally and figuratively speaking, to pull them out of that bog, right? There's got to be a way to do that, and it has to be that guy, right? Hands down. You have to make you have to make plays. You have to make it happen. So my deal right now to our scouting staff is let's analyze every element of what he is now, with all the traits. So what we call the metric tree / position specifics, we would run through that entire metric tree. We would bump out the most important areas. We can talk about that another time. There are so many elements. There might be 30 metrics that we are grading this quarterback on. And it's vital that we do it with a little bit of a different perspective than we might just grading a quarterback coming out of a college program, or grading a quarterback that you're even looking to trade for, right? It wasn't as messy back when they were trading, when things were going on with the transition from Houston. I mean, it had its own element. It was already quite polarizing. But what we're dealing with now is very different. How much of this is all the other distractions that he's going through right now, right? How much is adding to that? And that's what I would also like to know. Like, all right, where was he in those first years? Where is he now? Go ahead, Lindsay. You're about ready to say something.
Well, I was just going to say, how relevant is that if we don't expect any of these distractions to go away? We just had a brand new accusation pop into our laps this week. It is an ongoing snowball that is probably not going to get better fast enough to be relevant for him to improve dramatically, if that is the thing holding him back, because it looks like these distractions are going to continue. These headlines are going to keep going. So if you've exhibited in 2+ years an inability to separate your play from that, then that has to be something that you're taking into consideration if you're in that front office. But let's go back to just the first question that you asked there, which is you're sitting down with your trusted scouts, people whose eyes you trust. You're watching the tape. And now for this part of the conversation, I'm going to ask you to stop playing the role of Thomas Dimitroff, Brown's general manager. And now you're going to enter the play as the scout. So you've seen some of that tape, right? Now put your scouting hat on and tell me what he does look like. What does pop out when you put the tape on?
What pops out is he's struggling after a number of injuries. He is not what he used to be. He is declining. I mean, look, he was a legitimate talent coming out. We know that. Top-notch talent. And he was when he was playing, even when he was drafted, right? When he goes to be where he was drafted, and he goes to be what he was supposed to be at Houston, right? There's no question about that. He is declining for myriad reasons, to use the word that our guy Sam used there. That is a big deal, right? It's a number of things. It's not just he's getting older. So when you look at him and you watch him, he doesn't look to me like the athlete that he was. I always thought he was a much better athlete. You watch him right now, he gets in situations where he gets caught. He'll escape. But remember, Matt Ryan escaped at times when I'm thinking, Matt, when I think about some of those long, tall guys who escape, you're like, wow, it's pretty good. It's better than you expect. Well, people did always expect Deshaun Watson to be a top-notch type of athlete, moving around, ad-lib in the pocket. He's not doing that. The other thing that in my mind, at the level he should do, that's only part of it. He to me, I don't feel like he's taking it all in and reading the way that he might have before, or even in the situation now, right? They're making it fairly simple, but the way that his eye is, the way that he's diagnosing what's going on around him, the decision making that he is making seems to be much more suspect than it was prior to this, right? Without me doing a ton of work on it before, right? As I watch now, I think he can make the deep throw, right? He's got the ability to throw it deep. We know that. I look forward to hearing Sam's statistics on that. But there's so much inconsistency in his game per moving the ball around the field, balls knocked down, security of ball, whether he's fumbling, whatever it may be, it just continues to circulate around him. When you're looking at this guy and you're like, this guy is one of the highest paid quarterbacks ever was, right? What do you guys have for us? What's his number right now? 46 million.
Right. There's several guys now that are at 55, the Jordan Love type characters, Trevor Lawrence. We see Dak at 60 at the top. And then Watson comes in at 46, something at the time was fully guaranteed, a groundbreaking contract. Nobody's gone quite that far yet. And that even affected Lamar Jackson, who obviously has performed a lot better than him in the last 3 years, but he's still sitting at a massive cap hit, Thomas.
It's a massive. And while we're speaking about this very quickly, and I'm going to go back to this because when you watch a quarterback, Lindsay, and you see ability, you see athleticism, could be whoever we're talking about, right? You see how the full package is coming together, and then you see the decline. One of the things that really you struggle with is if your quarterback that you're evaluating, and if he is declining, and it is pocket awareness, pocket ability to move enough to get to a spot where he can ad lib and make throws off balance, at all levels of the field. That's what you're expecting, right? We saw Tom Brady do things as he was declining athletically, but making big time plays and winning games and continuing to rise to the occasion. It's when things get dusty and when a quarterback rises up to the occasion when it is dusty, that's your true mark, in my mind, of a championship quarterback. Some people can do it, some people can't. Obviously, he's not showing that he's doing that now. We can go on and on. You can continue to ask me about some of the specifics about the evaluation of this player, but where Deshaun Watson is right now, my perception, and I think our scouting group's perception, is he obviously has talent and the requisite skills to be a starter in the league, but it is a starter in the league with risk. Yeah, you're going to give me that look. I get it. He still does. But where is he? Remember I asked you on the ranking. I mean, where is that cat ranked right now? With that kind of money, I'll ask Sam this too. Is he a 20? Is he a 25? Or is he sub 20? Because if you're going to say he's sub 20, you better come to the table explaining how you can justify that he's a sub 20.
So that's actually a perfect segue to get to the data arm of this conversation, because there are numbers and rankings attached to all of these data metrics. And I have a feeling that I know where Sam is going to go with this answer, and I think it's lower than you're thinking. Sam, from a data standpoint, he just talked about what his, scout's eye sees. So forget what you see on the field. We're just looking at numbers now. What is notable for this conversation?
Right. And this is where, coming from a background where I grew up playing football, watching the game from a perspective of picking up things with my eyes that I could implement on the field, then having the data scientist background, I want to marry what Thomas has identified with what the numbers say and those rankings. So two of the things I picked up from what Thomas said was the mobility, how that was a major element of his game in the past, and his deep ball accuracy. And so I'm starting to look in the world of advanced metrics. I'm starting to look even in just the counting stats that can be aggregated multiple different ways. And so you look at his EPA, his expected points added, how he's really efficiently contributing to the team by rushing the ball. And he's been, one of the top 8 in the league all the way back to when he was, a rookie. And then in the last 2 years, perhaps because of those injuries, he's dropped into more of that median range around the 15th and the 16th mark. That's what he was last year in that statistic. Then we start looking at these deep ball and accuracy measures as well. And so in some of these advanced analytics, we've seen him take an even steeper dive. His last year, he was really one of the best people in terms of accuracy, in terms of making the throws from what we could see in the analytics. And it's just tanked to sub starter level. So that's sub the 32nd grade in the league. That is where he now sits in that deep ball grade T. And so we're mixing this in. We want to know if this is a pattern, particularly in the last 3 years. And if we can marry it to one of those situations that you mentioned, those subjective situations or those reasons. And it really does look like the injuries have caused a lot of problems. He was unavailable in 21 for, I believe, it was a suspension and an injury for that whole year. In 22, he only plays 6 games, and most of his advanced statistics are still in that near sub-starter or sub-starter level, sub 20 in the 32nd percentile, in the 32nd rank of the league. Same story in 23, 6 games, struggled to stay on the field, did not perform super well in those key metrics, such as, trying to avoid sacks, trying to keep the trains moving, keep everything on pace for the offense, for the Stefanski offense. And so it's a tale of two blocks, really, what he did in the past, where he was really successful and he was almost, in the top 8 of a lot of these metrics every single year, to what he's done when he's been with the Browns. And just this year, it's been quite tragic.
I don't want to step on any of your toes here from a data standpoint, but I would like to, I want to weigh in here with some stuff that I dug up, and then I would love to get your thoughts on it, right? Like contextualize it and fix what I'm saying if need be. I had a conversation with Eric Eager a long time ago, the former host of this show, who we all love, that works in the Panthers front office. And I asked him about numbers that were the most sticky in terms of predicting and evaluating quarterback play. And like, where should we be looking now that we have all of these advanced numbers, right, at our disposal? And the answers that he gave me, and this could be different for everybody, but the ones that he said at the time were sack rate. So I would go with pressure to sack rate as the stat there. EPA per pass play, so EPA per drop back, completion percentage over expectation. Like that, this group together would probably paint a pretty good picture of who the quarterback was. So I went back and I looked at these numbers for him. And to your point, Sam, when he was in Houston, I don't have rankings for pressure to sack rate, but so I'm going to push that one aside. We can come back if we want to. EPA per drop back, he was 5th best in the NFL in 2020. Again, last year with the Texans. Completion percentage, 70%. Number 3 in the NFL. Completion percentage over expectation, 3rd in the NFL. The year before that, 2nd to last year in Houston. 8th in the NFL in EPA per drop back. Completion percentage, 6th. Completion percentage over expectation, 12th. Like, he's in the top tier consistently in these telling stats. Now we go to Cleveland. And just giving you an idea, 2022, his first year there, EPA per drop back, we're at minus 0.16. Guys in this range: Zach Wilson, Davis Mills, Sam Howell, David Blau, Josh Dobbs. In 2023, minus 0.18. The only starters that were lower than that were Kenny Pickett, Sam Howell, Mac Jones, Bryce Young, and Zach Wilson. Again, not a group of quarterbacks whose names you want to be mentioned in, because we know we're done with them, right? I mean, for the most part, except Bryce is different because he's young. You're looking at a guy who's several years into his starting career, and we're not willing to give the same, like, well, maybe he'll turn it on, once he gets more experience. Completion percentage in 2022, 58.2. He wasn't a qualified passer because he didn't play enough games, but if he was slotted in with those who were, Thomas, he would have ranked 33rd in the NFL in that category. In 2023, same story, 61.4%. He was tied with Justin Fields for 29th. Who his team also moved on from him. We could do the same thing with completion percentage over expectation. My point is, in all of these stats, he was great in Houston, and he has been very bad in Cleveland. So now we have to figure out why, how much of that is, like, how much do we care about the why? Like, do we think it's going to stop? Because then the other thing here, Sam, and sorry, Thomas, I do want you to get back in and ask your questions. But I think that I'm anticipating what some people are going to say, which is that he hasn't been on the field that much, and it's been kind of roller coastery, and some of it's not his fault. Like Thomas just mentioned, the offensive lineman in week 1, maybe you throw week 1 out because it was a wonky situation. I mean, he had 25 pressures. That's very high. So let's do that. But there were a couple of games in there where he looked like he could maybe play. Maybe we're fixing this thing. So what do we learn in those games? Like, if you were able to isolate what happened in those handful of games where he did look okay, like, are we getting too ahead of ourselves? Have we seen examples of maybe he can if we did this more often? Sam, what would you say to somebody who pushed back in that way?
When trying to answer that question, the key is trying to divide credit for in the end game, the success factors that people saw. And so what a lot of people point to is that in 2023, they actually won a lot of games when Deshaun Watson he only lost one game to the Steelers. And so we're trying to divide credit. We're trying to view the story of the game through data. And so you look at some of those metrics, EPA per dropback, for example, and Deshaun did not perform super well in 3 of the 5 games that he played in. He did play pretty well against the Titans, but last year they were not a super successful team. And so then you want to figure out, okay, well then why were we winning those games? And sure enough, one of the best players in the league, Myles Garrett, who leads that great Browns defense, put up absolutely immaculate performances against those opponents. You're looking at the opponent's EPA in the 3rd percentile. So the opponent is not doing a lot, not moving the ball. And that's for like four or 5 of the games that they played in, where the defense is really carrying the load. And in those games, their team was scoring, 24, 22 points, kind of in that range. And it's just really hard to win a ton of games when you're not getting over that 24-point hump against NFL teams. And so, again, Watson was in and out of the lineup at this point. And so another question that I would kind of bring back to Thomas as kind of like someone who sees it all, who sees the whole domain, is what are you hearing from our performance scientist? What are you hearing from our sports scientist? So I'd be interested in understanding is like, what do you need to know about the injuries, and what are the questions you're asking the trainers, your performance scientists and stuff like that? Because I know that's really, really key to the way that general managers evaluate players.
Sam, it's a good dialogue, and I appreciate it. Before we go there quickly, you guys were talking about most of the data that you were talking about. Lindsay, you introduced it to, and Sam, you were talking about it. Most of us as general managers, I mean, look, one of the key metrics for us is, and let's call it the way it is, it's about accuracy. So where does that fall, and what advanced data point do you guys use? I'm talking about the academic side of the world.
Right.
Where is it? What part of that accuracy? Because you can have a strong arm. I mean, the reality is back in the day, the Jeff Georges of the world and some of these players that had big ass arms, but they never produced. They weren't leaders. There were many reasons that they didn't, excel in the NFL. But the ones who had the accuracy, all going all the way back to Joe Montana and such, some of those guys were just unbelievable with how they move the ball around. You can see some guys now, right? What Tom did, Tom could still zip the ball, of course, Brady, but he was just so damn accurate at so many levels. So talk to me a little bit about that before I go in and comment on the athletic performance side, because it's a great question you asked, but I'm very curious on the accuracy side of things from your perspective.
Yeah. So let's start off with the base layer of the pyramid, completion percentage, just finding completions. There was a great article out there about Joe Burrow, and he said the key to his success was finding completions. And Deshaun Watson really is not doing that in a Browns uniform. You look at where he ranked in terms of completion percentage during his time with the Texans, as Lindsay alluded to, in that, 5th, 6th, 3rd range in his times there. Now he's, again, at the sub-starter level in that 27th to sub-32nd level in terms of ranking guys who have the requisite amount of snaps. So taking it up another level, we look at what is expected by the places on the field that a player is, by the throws that he's making, and we want to find out the completion percentage over that expected mark. So it kind of gives some context to those throws, Thomas. And similar story here, in that kind of 5th range, 4th range, a little lower than he was in the completion percentage range, still sub-starter in a Browns uniform. And then finally, you want to take a look at those more advanced analytics, taking in your smartest guys, understanding what they're looking at. And typically across the board, the consensus is that he has not been performing up to snuff in that category as well. So that's kind of the pyramid from the most base level, just, charting down the stats, the completions and the targets and so forth and so on, all the way up to the really complex algorithms are in agreement there.
And remember, Lindsay, to that point very quickly, sorry.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, as the league is growing and evolving, Sam and Lindsay, and people understand that we are evolving as a league, in understanding data and utilizing data, why we even exist at SumerSports, because we believe the evolution of this league is going that way in the next 3, 4, 5, 10 years will be amazing, and how much more open-minded the football people are going to be, right? The younger guys are going to be so much more cognizant of the advanced levels of analytics. And that's what we're trying to do at Sumer, right? Just to put my own little sales plug in there, because what we used all the time as the box scores, they need to be there, right? We talk about it all the time when we set up our new tools or whatever they may be that we're presenting the NFL teams. You have to go with what people are used to having, Lindsay, as far as how they're gauging their players.
Right.
But that next 5 deeper analytical elements, algorithmic approaches that maybe some of these guys aren't used to, coaches and GMs, that's where we are going to educate. That's where everyone needs to become educated more, right? I say to any of my GM contemporaries, this is not about, again, I've said it before, not about black box. You all need to understand the importance of taking that data and helping you go from good to great, go from being a good general manager to a very good, or a good head coach to a very good, or a Hall of Famer. Why would you not want to use that data? In the advanced side of it, Sam, I'm fascinated because when I was making big time decisions with the Falcons, I look back sometimes, I'm like, God, was I that myopic and that basic on it? I mean, I used a lot of what I believed at the core was my art, right? My ability to evaluate someone. There's a lot to that, right? There's a lot. We can sit here and talk all about that. We haven't even talked about leadership, right? We can't talk about leadership from an analytics standpoint. Maybe we can. I'm hoping that we can develop something that is unbelievably proprietary and we got it figured out. But the reality is it is a big part, right? Where did that leadership go? And very quickly, Lindsay, before I toss it back to you, that leadership and where he was with the Texans to where he is when he signs the big new deal, you can talk to any GM and they'd put their hand up here and they would say to you, so one thing I don't have figured out, how am I going to know when I sign that kid to the new contract, is he doing this or does he plummet? We did that. We've done that with players before, and there've been the wah moments. And all of a sudden you're looking at yourself in the mirror and you're thinking, as a team builder, my God, I have some questions to answer for my owner that we just put hundreds of millions of dollars into someone, and he's not what we thought he would be.
Yeah. I would say with regards to this specific situation that I would have a hard time with, and I know you're not suggesting that was a broad question, right? But I would have a hard time if the Browns were like, how was I to know that he wasn't going to competently lead this team in the locker room? I mean, which, by the way, we don't even know. I don't even know what the dynamics are in the locker room here. But let's say that's on the table. A guy who has that many outstanding and is as polarizing in the media is likely to be as polarizing in the locker room. A locker room that's made up of human beings, that might feel one way versus another about the allegations against him. So I think you're already putting yourself behind the 8 ball there, in that, just mathematically speaking, half of your locker room might not be welcoming to him being the quarterback. And that should be factored into the decision to sign him. But I wanted to go back really quick because I think all those are really good points, Thomas. I love this conversation, by the way. Sam, I wanted to ask about catchable target rate, because there are some places that track that stat. I don't even know what goes into that stat, but there are places where you see that stat with regards to quarterbacks and sometimes with wide receivers. And they say, oh, his catchable ball rate was this because the quarterback couldn't even get him the ball within a certain range, whatever. How trustworthy are those metrics? How do you come about that? And does Sumer have one? And if the answer is no, that's totally fine, that it uses in terms of that we could apply to this, or is that not a trustworthy stat?
Yeah. And so at the public level, to Thomas's point, the goal is to try to get away from the box score, because you're not necessarily going to get any alpha, as the traders like to call it, anything above what everyone else is, because the public has that. You can go check that in your local newspaper. I know I was a local newspaper reader in Lake Charles, Louisiana. I realize that may be a little outdated, but nonetheless, you're looking for the things that can take it away from the stuff that everyone has and something that only you can have. And so one of the big pieces of that in the public has been the NFL Big Data Bowl, in which people have been using tracking data to kind of analyze how catchable targets, come up, not just from, making the tally marks and saying he completed it or not, but where the wide receivers and the quarterbacks and the ball is actually positioned on the field. And so Sumer uses similar techniques to that looking at tracking data, looking at computer vision, and trying to understand just the location of where all these players are. What does that mean to the actual outcome of the play in terms of something that, is a little bit more normal, such as points or EPA or yards? And in that metric, they try to take that away and bake that into something that is very simplistic, and often that aligns with something that the scouts are seeing and something that can make the scouts' job a little bit easier. And that's kind of Sumer's goal when putting together these metrics.
Can I just comment, Lindsay? I feel like we avoided Sam's comment about athletic performance and talking with your trainer regularly, figuring out what's going on, because I want to just take 30 seconds to talk about that. Vital. As a general manager, I would talk to my trainer. At the time, it was Marty Lazon. We actually worked together at the Browns. We would literally talk 2-3 times a day. He would talk to Dan Quinn 2 or 3 times a day. In today's world, that trainer is basically omnipresent up in the football wings, right? Because they're always sharing what's going on with the players, the injuries, et cetera, et cetera. When you're talking about a quarterback like that, who has so much money invested and has a history of injuries, how he's recovering, we continue to ask, measure and track the load on these players, right? We can have a whole other conversation on this another time. And I would love to, Sam, because I think it's so vital to dig into. Because if you're not tracking someone's load, if you have receivers out there that have a history of being great, but they yank their hamstring every time we turn it around. I mean, look, I had that situation with Julio, one of the best ever, first ballot Hall of Famer, again, all of that stuff. But we had to track the load. When you're talking about, I can only imagine the conversation every single day. Where is our guy today? How is he doing? How is he dealing with shoulder? How is he dealing with other leg, knee? How does he truly deal with that? And where's our load? Well, he's up at 75 or 80%. Well, as a general manager, you want to make sure you have lucid conversation with your head coach so that you can help track with the medical people. The coach can coach the football team, but you have to be able to be there to remind your coach on those players. And in this case, on a quarterback that's going to make or break this organization, how you are monitoring, how you are loading them, how you're not. And how there's so many other levels to that. But where we are right now with that, we're so far ahead of back in the day when Bernie Kosar was hurling the ball for the Browns, right? Those were very different days. In today's world, you have to be on top. And if you're not utilizing that data, Sam, the same kind of thing. If you're not utilizing the athletic performance data that you can draw, I don't think you're doing your fan base I think it's wrong. I think you, as an owner, a president, and a GM, head coach, you owe that to your kids on the team, the players, and you owe it to your fan base because it's there and it's available. If you're just winging it, it's something that I think is haphazard.
Yeah, Thomas, and I think that's one of the most fascinating things, because all of these players, all the players, the coaches, the families of the players, the front office have all been put in this tough situation. And so when you're just trying to answer the easiest, the most straightforward questions are sometimes the hardest to answer. And some of those discussions that you very clearly outlined, if you can answer those on the top, it makes a lot of the stuff easier underneath for the data team in particular.
So, Thomas, let's go back to being in that room in the Browns. You just had your scouts tell you he's a declining player. He's not the guy that he was with the Texans. That's what our eyes tell us. That's what the tape tells us. We heard from, the data, the numbers paint a picture of somebody who is not necessarily a startable quarterback. And I know you said that you thought that he probably still was, but and by the way, I just want to say this, because you could take a 1-week sample size and you could say he's at the bottom. Oh, look who else is there. You could even do that for a year. And in some of those numbers that I popped, I'll raise my hand and say, hey, some of the names around him, EPA per drop back this week, right? Some of the names around him when you rank 25th, Dak, Joe Burrow, we're not throwing them away. If you go look at like full year long things, completion percentage over expectation for 2023. All right. He would have slotted in at 31st. Kyler was lower. Are we throwing Kyler away? Mahomes was 29. So is Mahomes a shitty quarterback? No, but I think it's worth pointing out some of these things will pop one time. It's when you're creating a pattern where you are consistently in this range, that's where it's concerning. And I think that's why week 1 was particularly concerning, because we established a very low floor for him as a quarterback in 2023. We followed that up with that exact same floor in 2020. I'm getting my years wrong. You know what I mean? First year, second year. And now in week 1, it's in that same range. So now our stats are all hitting in the same range, and a picture is being painted of somebody who's not going to get us out of that range. That's what we're looking at. So if you have a guy that is consistently coming up in the same conversations as Zach Wilson and people who we've already moved on from at quarterback, I feel like there is certainly something to be said for the only reason we're not moving on from him is because of the incredibly large number that is his contract. Do you think that that's fair to say at this point, that that's probably what's keeping him on the field?
Well, let's go to what you were talking about at the beginning of that. So you get the evaluation, Lindsay, and then my personal opinion is now have Sam and his group run the data as he did, right? I would sit down and probably sit down with that staff, and we would spend hours going over the comparatives. Remember all the time, NFL GMs, head coaches, it's all about stack busting. It's all about layering. It's all about making sure that you know who are the top 10. Talked to you about this. We bantered a little bit about it, but I do want to know that on the statistics. I want to know it on accuracy. I want to know it on, sack avoidance, whatever that may be. I want a really good historic line for the here and now, whether that was midway through the season, whether it was the last 5 years, the last 10 years. I probably don't go, too much past, 15 or 14, I'm trying to think. My point is, I don't go 30 years on this necessarily. I want it to be fairly modern, but I do need to take the whole picture into your point, Lindsay, right? I know there could be blips. I want to make sure they're not just blips. Even if there are blips, I want to make sure I see that he was ascending, but where did he start to descend? And is that descending element continuous? And where are we? There's going to be ups and downs. All I want to know is before I make a final decision, I want to take the subjective side that we talked about, and it's so important for us. I want to take the data side and the deep data side, not just, as we talked about, Sam, not just the box scores. Like, let's really dig in here. And then what I want to do is I want to talk about the leadership side. I want to talk about the work ethic side. I want to talk about the focus side. I want to talk about, honestly, the brain side of this player. He could be a smart guy or not a smart guy or whatever it may be. But if he's not functioning well in a system, if he's not making decision makings, if his decision making is off and there's inconsistencies that way, and you have a pile and a ball full of inconsistency, it's one of my biggest pet peeves, especially in that position. Remember, you want no one who is like laden with inconsistency, right? You don't want them at any of the big pillar positions. You don't want them at your left tackle. You don't want them at your receiver. You don't want them at your cornerback, your pass rusher. Inconsistent. They can shine, and that's great. You especially struggle with that at the quarterback. The gauge, the benchmark is so much higher at every level, right? That's why they make the money they're making. So I would say this too, before we move forward on the next part of this discussion, after I have all of that in play, and we're sitting down with, again, my confidants in that group, before I go over to the head coach and spend a lot of time, because that is the next step, right? This could be during the season. The head coach, you'll have conversations with him as a general manager. Man, we have a big decision to make. Let us do all of the work here while you're preparing for the next game. Let us really work on this and see where he truly is right now. Again, this is nothing new for them, Lindsay. You know that. It's one game in. They've done a lot of this work. They're adding to it as this season goes on before they decide to make a tough decision. So you take all of that information and you sit down with the head coach. And at that point, you're also running what else is out there. We talk about short list, emergency list. What in the hell are we going to do in lieu of? Because I would say right now, you could argue with me, because I don't want to throw out where you think Jameis Winston is on the 32 rankings out there. But the reality is, are you truly getting someone in there? Do you cut ties? Where are you with that? Right. We'll see. We don't even get into legal stuff yet. Right. But there's a lot there. Can you cut ties with Deshaun Watson, or might you think about it? Who's coming in? Are you cashing out the rest of the season and just trying to get a high pick? I mean, are you really, truly thinking that way? Organizationally, you want to know how much pressure is on a GM if that is the situation? That is a big, big deal.
When, by the way, to the point, I mean, for this conversation, Sam talks about it. He was 5-1 as a starter last year, despite having played very, very poorly. They won because the defense was so good. I mean, I think you made a really strong argument there. So why take yourself out of the situation to play for a high pick when you've already exhibited we can maybe win despite all of this craziness? That said, I think the question that you brought up is a really good one that's always worth asking. And now what? So let's say we say, you know what, this roller coaster is like, we got to just move on, especially now that we've got new PR issues that we're having to answer for. Like, what? So the first person that you would turn to, if you're them, I would assume, is the backup right there in Jameis Winston. And I think it's a valid question because this is certainly not a guy. I would raise my hand and say, I am not confident he's going to be a lot better or more consistent than Deshaun Watson. I could make an argument for why I'm okay with that still. But Sam, I know you've looked at some of the numbers and can maybe answer this better than me. How would you approach that?
Yeah. So the first step there is looking at Jameis. And Jameis, in terms of the availability, has been in kind of a similar situation as Deshaun the last 2 years, where he was injured and in a backup spot, not playing a ton of games for the Saints. But what I do want to note is in those limited snaps, in those limited attempts in terms of passing, we did see that he does really well in big throws, and that's kind of his calling card. So then the second step that I wanted to take there is, well, we've been in this situation with Deshaun. How have we done with our two backups in the past? So the two guys in the past 2 years that have played a lot of games are Joe Flacco, the big arm guy who's winging it down the field, and for years and years and years with the Ravens was known for big plays to Jacoby Jones and in particular drawing a lot of pass interferences. And you won a lot of games with him last year, but he really didn't perform in the analytics the way you did, the way that you wanted. Now, that may indicate that you can get past some of these other things and go to Jameis without a ton of leeway, given how Deshaun has performed. But then if you go 2 years back, they struggled a little bit more in the win-loss column with Jacoby Brissett. However, Brissett, and it's probably the reason he's now the starting quarterback for the New England Patriots, did honestly not necessarily perform fantastic, but he was around a median level quarterback that year with a similar crew around him and obviously that great defense. You look at some of the statistics, he was actually third in completion percentage over expected. So he was actually pretty elite in that stat. Most of the other things in terms of EPA, in terms of points versus average starter, completion percentage is all kind of more in that median range. But you've shown that you can be successful with these backup quarterbacks. So in terms of the situation, you think you can have success, then you just have to drill down on the stuff that you've seen in practice. Thomas knows better than anyone. Practice film is sometimes some of the best film, and it doesn't lie. And you can kind of get a feel for how he works within your team and your situation.
I have a follow-up question about Jameis. And that is one of the things we all know about Jameis, which is that volatility. Big play,
right.
Awesome. We know he can do that. You mentioned it. We know that big play oftentimes leads to interceptions. So my follow-up question with regards to him on this specific team is that something you can metabolize better because the defense is so good? Or do you not want that to be in play and put the defense in a position to not be as good? How do you factor that in?
It's a great point. And, coming into that, average depth of target, picks are bad and turnovers are bad, but not all interceptions are the same. And when you're, pushing it down the field a lot and throwing picks, it's a little different than when you're trying to get a check down, a cornerback jumps the route, and all of a sudden you're giving up points and you're right back on offense. So Joe Flacco honestly had a similar kind of turnover propensity as Jameis has in terms of some of his accuracy scores, in terms of some of the stuff that he did in terms of interceptions. Joe Flacco lost a lot of EPA. He lost a lot of production on interceptions. You were still able to overcome that and win games. And frankly, Deshaun, throughout his career, has not really been absolutely fantastic on losing production due to interceptions as well. He's kind of been a wing it around guy as well. And so that's, again, trying to figure out the situation, trying to figure out the pros and cons. I think you're thinking about those numbers, and it's really kind of a 50-50 moot point there where it's like, it could go this way or go the other way, but that could be because Deshaun Watson has performed so poorly.
Let me interject, Sam, because all you're saying is so correct. And I think about how it really goes down in an organization. I just want everyone to know this as listeners, right? Sam's group in the world are climbing in importance in the National Football League as they are in the NCAA. And more interaction and seriousness taken to listening to people with a smart data approach to it. Again, one of the reasons why SumerSport even exists is because that is the way it is. And then there's the reality of this as well. I would guarantee that Andrew Berry, who is a very analytical guy as far as general managers go, as well as Paul DePodesta, they're talking about it on this level. They are breaking it down to a point where they're delivering it to the owners, right? The Haslams are getting that information. The head coach is getting the information that they're talking about. I just want everyone to know, and Lindsay, they're not just sitting there in every meeting hashing out every little bit of what Jameis Winston is on that level, presenting those pieces of information, and then they start to talk about it, and we have to make a move, right? You can't overanalyze, which is one of the things. You can look at all of what you need to look at and say, yes, is this guy right or wrong? And then it'll come back to the idea, all right, no one wants to be in this position. It is I was going to swear again. I've told myself I'm not going to swear more than once or twice in a.
Are you? I like it. I'm fine
show.
with it.
But I'm saying, like these guys, there is so much on their mind. For them to think they're going to play the rest of the season with a backup, it is. Yeah, I use the want. It is such a like the morale side of that. It's really tough to get your head around. Then you start working through it, and you're like, oh, we got to do what we have to do. But this comes back to, if we were not talking about these character issues that are rising, and you were just like pissed off because Deshaun wasn't what you expected to this point, how do you jumpstart him? Who's all up in him to get him going? Oh, that's what you're thinking about. Now you're thinking about, it's prophecy, or it's like, what is out there saying it's time to move on, right? It's, are the Browns fan base looking at it like, well, he's not only not been playing well on the field and lacking in all these areas, but he has all of this other stuff. What are we doing? Let's cut our losses and let's move forward. But again, cutting losses and moving forward, when you're thinking about Jameis Winston being the person to carry you into the rest of the season, then what are you thinking about as a general manager? And Andrew Berry, again, very adept. He just signed a new contract, right? I mean, the Haslams love Andrew Berry. We know that, right? This is a guy that is a young guy who understands about putting teams together at a young level. And he's very adept at analyzing what you might come up and your group of analysts might come up with. I just want to make sure that it's clear that why are these, sometimes it's perceived from the public, why are these people dumbasses? Why do they make this move instead of reading what the data is telling them? It's not always that easy, right? It's being able to take it all in, factor it all in, and make that final decision that you're looking at your owner and you're saying, yes, it's time to move on from $90-something million potentially. Wow, that's a whole other topic.
Yeah, and I can say, coming from a data science background, that analysis, paralysis due to analysis happens a lot in our field. And honestly, it's one of the biggest knocks against our field because scouts are trained, to pull the trigger and make their opinion known. And we tend to be more conservative in sharing our opinion. But I do want to note, when I was actually interviewing to come to Sumer, I listened to Thomas Dimitrov's interview with Andrew Berry to prepare me for how kind of they process in a data-based organization process this. So I want to kind of give Thomas his props for noticing that way before and communicating it to us right here.
Well, I would say it's amazing when you do think about Andrew Berry staying in the Browns organization, Lindsay, and exactly what Sam is saying. I mean, here's someone that is not approaching it just like anyone, but he is taking it all in and helping them make the decision, which is the right thing to do. Of course, that's not rocket science. We get that. How much they utilize, though, how much do they utilize when they make that decision? Because again, coming back to what Deshaun Watson is for that organization, we don't know it right now. Inside the building, they do. I mean, Lindsay, seriously, when you're talking about moving on from that, what are the repercussions back to what I asked before? Because at that point, I am going over to the head coach and we are spending a lot of time and we're saying, all right, now what? Let's go with Jameis Winston. Let's just say hypothetically we decide on that as co-team builders. Right. How are we delivering this to Jimmy and Dee Haslam, first of all, right? How are we delivering that? And then how are we, I mean, again, that's not as much the coach's deal, but as a GM, how are we delivering this to the masses? And how much fallout is there going to be on trust in our organization moving forward? How much do the owners have to deal with that? That's a big, big deal.
I think that that's a really interesting point with regards to this situation because this person is so polarizing. So I think whereas normally you would be like, this is embarrassing for us. We have to raise our hands and say we made a mistake with this contract. At this point, we all know that you already did. That is a given. Like it's had enough time to work its way out. And I mean, maybe there are people out there that are like, give him a few more weeks. We're going to turn it around. If you don't fall into that camp, which I think I feel comfortable saying I don't, they might continue to win, but I don't think they will win because of him. And I think that the only reason that he's being given an opportunity to maybe turn it around is because they're paying him so much money, and the situation that it's a hard situation to extricate yourself from. I think the circumstances are such. You painted a picture of Andrew Berry just got an extension, and so that tells me he is not being blamed for this already because it already hasn't worked out prior to him getting an extension. He's not going to pay the price for this decision. We all already knew that this decision was made by Jimmy Haslam at the ownership level because you would never give a general manager and you would never be like, you know what? Fully guaranteed contract. That's what we got to do. I don't know how you feel about it, owner, but I'm going to go ahead and do this. Like, obviously, Jimmy Haslam probably wanted him, probably pushed to get him under the circumstances, certainly had to sign off on him. And then the contract had to do that also. So the fact that Andrew Berry already got an extension, despite the fact that this clearly didn't work out, tells me that they're telling him, I know this wasn't you. You've done good work. Whatever happens here, you're probably fine. So do you read into that in the same way where like, he's probably okay and now just go make football decisions moving forward?
Well, I think what's important to talk about there, Lindsay, is to edify the public. When you have a general manager who is a very established as far as in the hierarchy, right? I mean, he's still a young general manager. You make the calls on, ultimately you do make the calls on your personnel, right? If Andrew Berry does in fact have final football say there, which is what he does as we understand, he still will answer to the owner and the ownership group when you make a big decision. You might not. You might say in the end, hey, Andrew, it's up to you, right? The owner may say that, but you're not getting things passed through without an owner checking off and endorsing. You might on some of the midline level deals, even some of the higher deals. When you're talking about a quarterback, every owner is involved in discussing that in today's world. Might not have been the way all the time back in the day, but it is happening. So all I'm saying is it becomes not just a general manager deal. It becomes an organizational deal, right? When we signed Julio Jones to the $22 million deal, or Matt Ryan, the two highest paid at that time, that was something that you discuss with the ownership, right? It has to be discussed. I have never personally read that the Haslams were the ones that pushed that. You had just mentioned that. I don't know.
No. I'm not even saying that. I'm just saying, obviously, like just reading between the lines, like obviously, right? Like there's no chance Andrew Berry was like, I'm not even calling you. I'm not even asking you. I'm going to do this on my own. If he doesn't have that, of course, it's the Haslam's money.
I understand what you're saying now. And that's being realistic about it. Yeah. That is on any of those big time decisions to your point. Yeah. Okay. So, but then what? Let's hypothetically take this even away from Cleveland for a second. And I know we're moving on time here. Any of those big decisions that are made within an organization take a lot of well thought out individuals who are spending a lot of time. They're not just haphazardly. I like the guy's eye color and I like the way he shakes my hand. Let's go with him. Let's give him another $250 million a year. That's ridiculous, right? There is of course, many, many, many layers to it. But when you think about that, how much of a responsibility over the years is it for the general manager, let's put it in this case, to say, I get you, owner, but I disagree. I had some conversations with a couple general managers recently regarding this, but outside. They weren't even pointing this towards Andrew Berry. They were saying to me, I have gone to my owner before when they have gotten into sort of that, I hate to call it meddling. It's their train set, right? But you know what I mean?
Right.
You would think they wouldn't be involved. They get involved because they're passionate about it. And then all of a sudden that GM says, yes, sir. And they're overly acquiescent versus if you want me to do that, you're going to have to fire me. You want to talk about taking a lot of courage to do that. That's not easy. Just like taking a lot of courage to cut or trade a guy that you drafted in the top 5, 6, or 7 of the first round. We've had a number of those. That's a whole lot. Those are big time, ballsy decisions for these general managers to make. Where Andrew right now is, that's a big time decision for him to be on board for this next decision, because Mr. Haslam and D. Haslam are going to be looking to Andrew and the group to give them all the information that we've just talked about and to say yes or no, stay or go. And we'll be interested to see how that plays out.
I want to give Sam an opportunity to just close this out with his opinion. First, though, I just want to say really quickly, also in regards to your last question before about how you extricate yourself and the implications from that. This is such an interesting, different kind of situation than we usually deal with in the NFL when you're having to pull yourself out of what might have been a bad decision, in the sense that half of your fan base, and I'm just guessing on percentages, already wants him gone because they don't like him, because they don't want to root for him. So you're now, from a PR standpoint, you have the luxury to pull yourself out and make a lot of people just happy. Just like the football stuff aside, some people will be like, well, there you go. Now I can root for this team. You have that baked in a way that most teams don't when they have to back out of contracts in this manner. So I think that you're a little bit more protected if you're the Cleveland Browns, if that were something that you're factoring about. Like, how do we spin this? The spin is kind of built in.
Is it an easier decision to make? Put on your GM hat. I'm only beating you to it because I don't want you to ask me this question. Putting your GM hat on. If the league suspends Deshaun Watson, are you moving on ASAP?
I think that's clear at this point that they're probably, I mean, it's clear to me. I don't, whatever that means, right? Like we just presented so much data that's like, shit, this didn't work. He was not the Deshaun Watson that we thought we were signing from Houston, in which case all of this bad stuff, that's a separate conversation. We were willing to take that on because we thought we were getting one of the best quarterbacks in the NFL. Now that you have not, it's just bad. It's bad, bad, bad. So if you're given an out at this point, you're like 100%. We're looking for every out. And if something comes up, I mean, don't even get me started about whether they should be allowed out of the contract, because there's this weird, like, oh, this allegation that's exactly like the other allegations that you were totally fine with looking the other way on, all of a sudden should give you an out on a contract because you didn't know about that one that's exactly the same anyway. But I think 100% they're looking for it.
I think, yeah. I mean, if that is the case, and those aren't easy. I mean, right now where we're sitting as talking heads, it can see like, oh, of course you're going to move on. But all of these things with all the data there that's pointing in a certain direction, but there's other stuff that we don't know inside the building, and we don't know the team, how they bond with him, what if they're behind him or not. All the other elements that are worked in and baked into this decision, they're complicated. Yes. And when you look at an owner, it's not that easy. Let's wait on the edge of our seat for the league to say he's being suspended. We move on from the $90+ million, which let me just throw out a really interesting food for thought, right? I happen to be doing research on this. When you look at the final deal before he was traded to the Browns, and this isn't about Jack Easterby and the Houston Texans fleecing the Browns at all, or Andrew, because I told you how I'm so positive about Andrew and where his intelligence is. But for perspective, the last deal that they did there in Houston, there was only $16 million of dead money. When you think about that, that's one of the best deals that has been made in the NFL. However you want to look at the Texans over those years, that is amazing. There was less than 50% of cash signing bonus and guaranteed money. You look at some of the dead monies there in the 40 millions down all the way through the 30s. The fact that they were able to move Deshaun during all of that and only have a $16 million dead hit, to me is fascinating work by Jack Easterby and that group. Again, I guess my point there is you never know how it's going to play out, right? There are some unbelievably smart people in this league who make very good decisions. Sometimes they're overshadowed. Sometimes it works. Sometimes they don't. Just because they don't work doesn't mean that organization or that person is a numbnut, for lack of a better word, right? It means it didn't work out. The decision wasn't the right decision. Not everyone is 100%. Sam knows that very well. We have people in football all the time who are saying, man, if you can show me 98% that efficacy and what you guys are doing at Sumer, I'll buy you for $500,000 a year. And I'm thinking, football people, come on. There should be a difference between, I don't know, help me, Sam, 12.1% and 13.2%.
Right.
Worthy of it. But anyways, I got off on a tangent there, but it was a passionate tangent. I think Sam needs to finish this combo. You're right.
Sam was nodding feverishly, so I know he's got stuff to say.
Well, even when you're a player, when you're a coach, when you're a general manager, when you're a family in the stands or a fan, everyone knows that the reason why we love football so much is because it is an unpredictable game. And so, like Thomas said, the goal of the analyst, the goal of the general manager, the goal of the owner is to just add like 2%, 3% consistently. And that really makes all the difference. And so, like, we love the game. We love some of the crazy stuff that goes on in it. Obviously, this one has, kind of a darker side. There's some other things going on there. But in terms of unpredictable, Andrew Berry, I think, is a very process-oriented person. I know Paul DePodesta, there's tons of writing about how he's process-oriented. The Browns as an organization have involved themselves in process-oriented decision-making. And Nick Saban says it the best, it's not always what's on the scoreboard. Sometimes it's just about, did you stick to the process? Did you do your job? And I think this is a situation where you have to make hard decisions. You have to do the hard evaluation, and you have to do your job to the best of your ability.
Well, we'll see what they end up doing here in Cleveland. Probably not in the next few weeks. My guess is that this is a conversation that we jumped the gun on in terms of what the team is likely to do. But it's a conversation that I know a lot of people are having. And so I think it was a really interesting conversation in terms of being very data and information driven. We'll find out how Deshaun Watson looks on the field. This weekend, the Browns are one of 10 games in the early window taking on Jacksonville in Jacksonville. And so we'll have lots to talk about next week. Sam Brookhouse, thank you so much for joining us. Sorry, go ahead.
I'm sorry. I was going to say, do they have their starting tackles back, Lindsay? Like, where are they with the injury? And I know we're not prolonging this conversation, but it is something to think about. And at the core, what I want to say as a GM is, let's all take a deep breath here. Legal stuff aside, let's see how this plays out. Let's get things together. They were so excited. You see how they kicked off that game? The Browns fans are great fans, of course. They were so excited, and it just started like tailing off before you know it, all these 3 and outs. And that's what I would say. Let's give it a little bit of a break here before we all panic. I think we did a really good job not going over the top here, Lindsay. So, and Sam,
I get emotional about this subject matter, so I'm sorry, for any interjections. But I also think that that's indicative of the conversation that people are having for a variety of different reasons surrounding this subject matter. So, Sam, you're amazing. Thomas, you're amazing. Thank you so much for contributing to the conversation in the ways that you guys did. And we'll be back with another edition of the SumerSports Show next Tuesday to take a look back at all of the games that have yet to take place in week 2.